Year 2, how are you? And welcome to today's science lesson. Now, before we move on to today's learning, I have sent you your mid-topic quiz, which is called Year 2 Science 1st of March Resource 1. So before you start watching the rest of this video, please could you pause the video and have a go at your mid-topic quiz. Okay, Year 2, so how did you get on? Fantastic, well done. So now let's move on to today's learning. So today we're going to be carrying on with our growth and survival topic by looking at the environment and answering the question, how is the environment a factor of survival for animals? So what I mean by this is how does the environment that an animal lives in affect their survival? How does their environment help them to survive? So by the end of today's lesson, you will understand that animals live in different habitats, okay, and that they have adapted to these habitats. You'll also understand that an animal's habitat, like I said, can affect their survival, but I wonder how it can affect their survival. Now here we have two words, habitat and adapted. Now don't worry if you don't know what these words mean just yet, because we'll be looking at them together in a little while, and by the end of the lesson you will be able to tell me what these two words mean. Now last lesson, if you think back, we learned about the basic needs for survival, didn't we? All of the things that animals need in order to survive. And we learned about 3 of the basic needs. But can you remember what they are? So can you remember the 3 things that all animals, including humans, need to survive? Pause the video now and have a think. Okay, Year 2, so let's see if you've remembered. Well, the first basic need that we learned about is that all animals need oxygen to survive. Now, animals get this oxygen in different ways. For example, most animals will breathe in this oxygen using their lungs. But then there are some animals that don't have lungs, like fish. So how do they get this oxygen? Well, you're right. They get this oxygen through their gills, don't they? Because fish have gills. Fantastic. Well done if you remembered that first basic need for survival. Now, the second need that we learned about was food. So all animals need food to survive. Now, when we think of food, we think of 3 different types of animal. We have carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores. Now, can you remember what these different types of animals eat? Oh, yes, a carnivore will eat meat and only meat, won't it? A herbivore will eat only plants. Now, what will an omnivore eat? Oh, yes, an omnivore eats plants and meat, okay? So they eat both of those things. So even though all animals need food to survive, animals get this food in different ways. For example, some animals eat plants, some eat meat, and some eat plants and meat. Now, the last basic need for survival that we learned about was that all animals need water to survive. They need this water to keep them hydrated. And again, there are different ways in which animals can get this water. So remember, the first way is that by eating, okay? So animals can get water by eating plants. So a herbivore and an omnivore can get the water that they need to survive by eating these plants. Now, animals and people actually can also get this water by drinking from a river or a stream, okay? Now, remember we saw that animal that was drinking from a stream, didn't we? But also the water that we get from our taps and the water that we find in the supermarket is also from rivers and streams, isn't it? Okay, now there was one other way that some animals can get water. Now, can you remember what that other way was? Yes, you're right. Remember, animals that live underwater can get this water by absorbing it, soaking it in through their skin. And that was very interesting, wasn't it? Okay, so well done if you've remembered those 3 basic needs. Now let's move on to what we're learning about today, which is environments. So animals live in lots of different habitats. Now, what do I mean by the word habitat? We looked at habitats briefly when we looked at oceans and seas. But could you pause the video and see if you can remember what does habitats mean? Okay, Year 2, so let's see if you remembered from our oceans and seas topic. Well, a habitat, which is a noun, has 3 syllables. Will you clap them with me? Okay, 3, 2, 1. Habitat. Fantastic. And a habitat, well done if you remembered, is the home of an animal or a plant. So it's where an animal or a plant lives. And as I said, animals live in lots of different habitats. So on the side, we've got 3 examples of some habitats. We've got the desert, we've got the ocean, and we've got a cold environment like the Arctic. I wonder which animals live in these different habitats. Well, can you please, Year 2, shout to the screen, what does habitat mean? Yes, you're right, fantastic. A habitat is the home of an animal or a plant. Well done. Okay, so these animals live in lots of different habitats and their bodies have adapted to suit the environment they live in. Okay, so their bodies have adapted so that they can live in that particular habitat, in that particular environment. Now, what do I mean by the word adapt? Again, could you pause the video and have a think? What do I mean by adapt to an environment? Okay, so as I said, all of these animals have adapted to their environment. Well, adapt is a verb. And as I said, you can say that an animal adapts to an environment. And that means that they have special features that help them to survive in a particular environment. Okay, so their bodies have adapted, have changed, they have special features so that they can survive in that particular environment. For example, the Arctic, okay, the animals in the Arctic, well, it's very cold there, isn't it? So therefore, they would need lots of fur on their bodies, wouldn't they, to keep them warm. And therefore, you could say that their bodies have adapted to the cold temperatures by having fur all over their bodies. And then we learnt about camels, didn't we, who could go days and days without water. And that is why they have adapted to the environment of the desert, because in the desert it's very hot and there isn't much water. So therefore, camels have adapted to this environment because they can cope in this environment and they don't need much water. Okay, so their bodies have adapted to suit the environment they live in. Okay, so let's go back to these 3 animals. We've got a polar bear, a lion, and a shark. Now, what is different about where these animals live? Which type of habitat do you think these animals live in and why? Pause the video now and have a think. Okay, Year 2, so let's go through these animals one by one. So our first animal is a polar bear. Now, well done if you guessed that a polar bear lives in polar regions or in a very cold environment, you could have also said. Now, as you can see on the picture, this animal has adapted to its habitat by having thick coats, okay? Now, what do I mean by thick coats? Well, by thick coats, I mean that it's got lots of fur on its body, hasn't it? A polar bear has lots of fur. Now, why do you think this polar bear has lots of fur if it lives in a polar region? Well, it has lots of fur, doesn't it, to keep it warm in this cold polar region, okay? So it doesn't get cold where it lives, okay, because its habitat's very cold. It needs this thick fur to keep it very warm. Okay, now what was the next animal that we looked at? Oh yes, it was a shark, wasn't it? Now a shark, as we know, lives underwater. Okay, now why does it live underwater? Well, sharks and other fish live underwater because they do not have lungs to breathe in oxygen like land animals do. But instead, like we know, they have gills to take in oxygen from the water, because remember, there's lots of oxygen in the water that they can take up through their gills. Now, another way in which they have adapted to their habitat, which is underwater, is by having bodies that are very smooth. Now, why do you think it's important that they have smooth bodies? Well, it is important that they have smooth bodies so they can move easily in the water. Okay, so a shark has adapted to living underwater because it has gills to breathe in oxygen and it has a smooth body so it can move easily in the water. So we've had our polar bear with a thick coat to live in polar regions, and we've had our shark with gills and a smooth body to live underwater. Now, what was our last animal? Oh, yes, it was a lion, wasn't it? Now, lions live in what are called grasslands, okay? And they live in hot countries, okay? So their bodies have had to adapt to living in a very hot country. Now, their bodies, if you look at the colour, what colour is a lion's body? Well, their bodies are a sandy colour, okay? So they're almost the same colour as sand. Now, why do you think this is? Well, this is to help them blend into the landscape, okay? So they can't be seen. So this is also called camouflage, and it helps the lions to sneak up on their prey. So when they're looking to catch an animal, they can bend down in the grass, which is the same colour as their skin. So they're both sandy colours so that their prey won't see them and they can catch them. Okay, so their bodies have adapted to this environment by almost being the same colour as the environment so that they can keep getting food and catching their prey. Okay, so there we go. Those are the three animals that we had in the three pictures. And we have learnt that a polar bear lives in a polar region and it has thick fur to keep it warm. We have the shark that lives underwater and it has gills and a smooth body so it can move easily. And then we also had the lion who lives in grasslands in hot countries, which has a sandy coloured body so that they can camouflage themselves, so they can hide themselves when they're trying to get food.